Meet Joe. Joe thinks that he can use science to prove the existence of his God. We've heard this one before, but maybe he'll come at it from a different angle and might just find different results. We're going to get right into it, but first, if you're new here, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot, and you will get more videos like this in your own personalized algorithm. Thank you. With that said, here we go.
Hi, and welcome back to Shameless Popery. I'm Joe Heschmeyer. So I want to talk about kind of a big idea. I'm calling this tentatively how science proves God's existence. But the argument I'm going to make in this episode is really that reason itself relies on God's existence.
Oh, it's a bait and switch right out of the gate. So he's he's changing it from science to reason. Now, of course, science relies heavily on reason. Does reason rely on God? That's sort of a transitive property. God to logic to science, something like that. We've also heard this one before, and it's a little bit more difficult of an argument to make. Let's see how Joe does.
And the reason I want to start with science is because oftentimes there's this idea that science and religion are opposing forces, and you've got to really choose one or the other. This often comes up in debate.
Hold the phone. Did he just switch the graphic to the March of Progress? Is our friend here, I realize he said he's Catholic, Shameless Popery, but is he a creationist? Is he an evolution denier? He does realize that the Pope has acknowledged evolution as a thing. I hope. My goodness. Can you imagine a regressive Catholic? A Catholic who is more Catholic than the Vatican, who's pushing back against the Holy See's decrees? Ooh, the heresy. The shameful heresy.
It's about creationism as opposed to evolution. By all means, I'm not saying that all religious claims are compatible with all scientific claims. It's not my argument at all.
There's not much wiggle room, my friend. Religion, of course, presupposes something supernatural happened at some point. Science is based on the underlying assumption that there is no supernatural interference in the universe, that every single process is a naturalistic process, until and unless shown otherwise. And it has to be that way, because if supernatural forces were factored into the scientific method, then we could never verify anything. Every test could conceivably be tinkered with by divine magic or something, and we've never observed that. It's sort of like the idea of creation. Creationists pose that no one has ever witnessed evolution, which of course we have. We do it every day. But they say no one sees evolution happening. What we don't see is things poofing into existence fully formed, like you would expect in a world where creationary forces rule. So it's something to keep in mind.
But I am going to argue that faith and reason belong together and become incoherent when you separate them. And more specifically, I'm going to make a twofold argument. Number one, if theism is true, there's an adequate reason to believe in science. And
I have to take issue with that. If theism is true, there's no reason to believe in science, because supernatural stuff will override the physical laws of the universe. We can't depend on gravity if there's a magic sky wizard who can just turn it on and off, or intensify it, or weaken it, or whatever. We can't depend on mitochondrial action if there's sorcerous powers coursing through the blood and enchanted books full of magical knowledge that mortals can wield for wicked ends of who knows what. Supernatural interference in the universe renders science completely unreliable.
Again, we can make that even bigger. There's an adequate reason to believe in reason.
Now we're talking a step remove. If theism is true, there's an adequate reason to believe in reason. I don't think that those follow. Perhaps he'll elaborate, and hopefully so, but I don't see how theism existing means reason must exist. And I've heard the Frank Turek talk, reason, the laws of reason have to descend from on high. They have to be given to us by a creator. That's not demonstrated, and that's not demonstrable. We mortals constructed the laws of reason. They're our descriptions of how logic works. in order to better understand the universe. And while it's true we do have to presuppose them in a mental sense, they have yet to fail us. So there's that.
Number two, if theism is false, if God doesn't exist, in other words, then there's no adequate reason.
You're going to need to demonstrate that, my friend, because even if you are a theist, if you believe in one God or a pantheon or what have you, you are also simultaneously asserting that every other kind of theism is false, and yet you still believe in science. I hope. So, if multiple theisms are false, and only one of them is true, then you have a little bit of a probabilistic imbalance, I suppose you might say. But also, you don't have a mechanism to connect the two without that underlying assertion that science comes from reason, which comes from God. That's the actual argument you're making. This twofold argument thing is just a mask over that, and it does not track, and it cannot be verified.
Another way of framing that would be to say, if science is trustworthy, then God must exist.
Can you prove that? Because science, generally speaking, is trustworthy. Therefore, God must exist? How? Why? In what way? Science working in the way science works is exactly what we would expect to see in a universe without a God. Let's look at it this way. Let's change the argument slightly. Instead of saying, if science is trustworthy, then universe-creating pixies must exist. How does that follow? It doesn't compute. The existence or not of universe-creating pixies has nothing to do with the efficacy of science, unless you want to say that it could only happen because the universe-creating pixies created a world in which science works. And even then, you're still left with just a creation myth. It could be literally anything else that created it. It could be Allah, it could be Odin, it could be Ganesh. We have no way to know. And something that doesn't point to a particular answer isn't really a good indicator of truth.
So the first claim, if theism is true, there's an adequate reason to believe in science. If there is a creator God who's all-powerful, all good, and designed us to know, love, and serve him.
Okay, so now we're narrowing it down to a very specific claim. A creator God who's got all the omnis and designed humanity to know him, to love him, and to serve him. Very specific. Now we're getting somewhere. But can you demonstrate that science working, that reason working, depends on the existence of this entity that can't come to be in any other way, particularly a naturalistic cause? Can you demonstrate that without the creator God wanting humans to love him, wanting humans to serve him, that science would not work?
Then part of that knowing, loving, and serving him involves this capacity to know the truth. So it makes sense that we would have ways of understanding the world around us. It makes sense that we'd have ways of understanding things through reason. That faith and reason are both these God-given gifts, and for the same purpose, to understand God and creation better.
Okay, faith and reason are God-given gifts for the same purpose. Well, that's kind of redundant, isn't it? Like, if you're supposed to understand your supposed God through faith, what do you need reason for? If you're supposed to understand your God through reason, what do you need faith for?
Whether you agree or disagree with the existence of God, the point here is just, if God exists, then it makes sense why we have reason. It makes sense why we have, all of that follows.
Not really, no. Because if God exists in the way that has been described, that the purpose of humans, that it's a creator God with all the omnis, and the purpose of humans is to know him, love him, and serve him, reason has no place in any of that. It's all faith. In fact, reason works counter to those, because reason leads us to ask questions like, if this God is all-loving, why are there parasites? Why are there earthquakes? Why are there volcanoes? Why is there war? Etc., etc. So, no, reason does not support that interpretation at all.
And if we have reason, then we can have science, etc. On the flip side, if God doesn't exist, then there's no adequate reason to believe in science. Since if there is no God, there's no creator, why does that mean we can't have reason? Why does it mean we can't have science?
Good question.
And there's a lot of different ways of framing this argument. I want to explore a couple of them, a few really, from Chesterton and then from Bishop Robert Barron, but he's quoting Benedict XVI, and then I'm going to quote Benedict directly. And then I'm going to look actually at an atheist philosopher named John Gray, who's going to make a very similar argument.
I love the eyebrow wiggle, an atheist philosopher. So we're going to get a whole bunch of quotes. This is the argument. Just, okay, let's see what they got.
So Chesterton, he puts the argument like this. He says, it is idle to talk always of the alternative of reason and faith. Reason is itself a matter of faith. It is an act of faith to assert that our thoughts have any relation to reality at all.
I wouldn't really describe it as faith. I would say that, of course, there's always the problem of hard solipsism. We can't prove that we're not brains in a vat or minds in a matrix. We have no way to do that. So we have to have faith that the information we're getting from our senses is reliable, that it's describing a real reality and not some hallucination or simulation. But that's not really faith in the sense it's normally meant. That's kind of an equivocation on the word faith. We're not talking about belief in something that defies reason, a supernatural power. We're talking about faith in something that is reasonable, that is naturalistic, that makes actual sense, that our senses function. Not a big leap.
Pause on that line, because that's going to be a really critical idea. For me to make sense of the world around me requires that I have the belief that the thoughts I have some kind of connection to external reality, and they have a connection such that I can know the external world. And if you know anything about the history of philosophy, that is a very controversial idea.
Okay, so we've gone from using science to prove God, to using reason to prove God, to using quotes from philosophers to prove God. And now we're descending into the logic of meta-philosophy. This is getting really esoteric really fast. I wonder where we'll go next.
He says, if you're merely a skeptic, you must sooner or later ask yourself the question, why should anything go right, even observation and deduction? Why should not good logic be as misleading as bad logic? They're both movements in the brain of a bewildered ape.
Well, that's a bit of a mischaracterization. After all, it took us quite some time to figure out what is good logic and what is bad logic. Remember, we created the laws of logic to help us describe reality. If the laws that we came up with were not effective, if there were no distinguishable difference between good logic and bad logic, we wouldn't have gone with those laws. We would have kept looking until we found laws that did make a distinction, that showed us what good logic was.
Concludes, the young skeptic says, I have a right to think for myself, but the old skeptic, the complete skeptic, says, I have no right to think for myself. I have no right to think at all.
In the literal sense in which it is presented, we have no right to think. We think in defiance of the idea of rights or even responsibilities, because those things do not apply to biological processes. We simply do. We have no right to digest our dinners. It simply happens, because that is the key difference between a naturalistic process and a consciously constructed process, like logic.
A lot of what we're seeing right now in new atheism and kind of its offshoots are these kind of young skeptics. I mean, it's these people who've said, aha, are these religious claims really true? I've got reason to doubt them. I want to think for myself.
First of all, there is a large influx into the new atheist population because people are saying, I have reason to doubt. But the better question is there a reason to believe? Many of us find our way into deconversion by saying we have reason to doubt. We look at these claims and we go, that's patently absurd. That's ridiculous. Why would anyone believe that? But then, when we get a little bit more advanced in our journey, after we've deconstructed a while, after we've thought about it for a while, the tables get turned. And now instead of saying we have a reason to doubt what others are asserting is the truth, we have to ask, why is there any reason to believe that assertion in the first place? And we find, generally, it's lacking.
And fair enough, but they're not being critical about their own critical faculties. They're not being skeptical about their own skepticism.
That would be skeptisquaredism, or perhaps metaskepticism, or inception.
And when you apply the same methodology to atheism, the same methodology even to reason that you apply to faith, you can tear down that house of cards very quickly.
Really? Please demonstrate that. I would very much like to see someone disassemble atheism by using the same means atheism uses to fend off theistic assertions. We say, can you prove it? No? Well, then we don't believe you then. That's it. How exactly are you going to use that against a doubt? Atheism makes no positive claim. How in blazes are you supposed to use skepticism against someone who says, I doubt what you said until you can prove it? How does that work? I would love to see it.
Joseph Ratzinger, who goes on to become Benedict XVI.
And yeah, that's all there is on that. There's no explanation. There's just, oh, well, we can knock down atheism like a house of cards. Okay, do it. Show me. No? Okay, let's move on.
Argues that finite being, as we experience it, is marked through and through by intelligibility. That is to say, by a formal structure that makes it understandable to an inquiring mind. For any logical endeavor, whether you're talking science, philosophy, theology, math even, two things have to be true. Number one, the universe must be knowable. And number two, we must be capable of knowing.
These feel like non sequiturs, like they're not really connected. Like, in order for you to understand 2 + 2, the universe must be knowable, and we must be capable of knowing. We know there are animals who can do basic math, who can count. Our chimpanzee friends can tell the difference between 2 apples and 4 bananas. Our crow friends know how many shiny rocks they have in their collection. They may not be able to articulate the number to us, but if we show them 2, and then we show them another 2, they will understand it's 4, even though they don't have the language for the word. The concept is there. There are horses who can stomp their feet a certain number of times to indicate certain things, depending on how they're trained. So, are we going to assert that these are fully sentient beings who wonder about the cosmos and have made conclusions about the nature of reality? Or is it more reasonable to think that maybe math doesn't require a deep, introspective meta quest to understand the purpose of life? I dare say it's probably the latter.
It's like this. If I've got a book, 2 things have to be true. 1, the book has to be legible. And 2, I have to be able to read.
Okay, that much is true. That particular analogy, standing alone, is true. A book you can't read is no good to you, whether it's a problem with the book or your own language skills. Whatever the disconnect is, if you can't read it, it's no help. Fair enough. But does that relate to understanding basic concepts of our individual reality, such as basic math like 2 + 2 is 4, when compared with understanding the fullness of the cosmos and the destiny of man?
Otherwise, I can find no meaning in those things. He says, in point of fact, all of the sciences, physics, chemistry, psychology, astronomy, biology, and so forth, rest on the assumption that at all levels, microscopic and macroscopic, being can be known.
Being can be known. That's a weird way to put that. I would agree that all the sciences rest on the presupposition that things can be known. Because if things could not be known, no one would do science. What would be the point? We wouldn't make it far enough to even classify them as sciences.
Saying, well, it makes sense that we've been evolved so that we're able to read one another. It's a lot more of a stretch to say, as a result of mere blind evolution.
Mere blind evolution.
We're able to read the cosmos. We're able to read, microbial life.
Just because we can understand some of what's going on in the cosmos, in the vastness of the universe, and some of what's going on at the level of microbes, doesn't mean we have the language to read that particular book. It's taken us hundreds of years to figure out what we're even looking at, let alone what it means. And that requires the use of our problem-solving brains to decipher these codes. We're looking at books that we can't read and trying to figure out what they say anyway. To go back to that book analogy, maybe they're legible, maybe they're not. We haven't gotten all the way through them, but we're deciphering them as we go, and so far it's working okay, but it is very slow progress, because we don't innately speak those languages. And if we were created by an all-knowing creator who had the ability to imbue us with knowledge of those languages, to continue with the analogy, and did not, then you'd have a very hard time making the argument that that was a thing that we were created to do.
In this really sophisticated way that our caveman forebears never were able to.
Yeah, we have better tools than our caveman forebears. We have telescopes and microscopes and electron microscopes and spectrometers and all kinds of goodies. If our caveman forebears had the tools and the technology and the underlying base of knowledge on which new knowledge can be built like we do today, they absolutely could do the same things we can do. If you went back in time, found a caveman of your choice, gave them 20 years or so of education about microbiology and handed them a microscope, they absolutely could start making new discoveries about microbes. But they're not born with that knowledge. They're not created with the ability to read out of that book.
It's just a happy accident. Because you can't really say there's some sort of survival of the fittest benefit.
Are you sure about that? Because it seems to me that our ability, using our problem-solving brains and making gradual progress, building on what we can understand to reach new heights of what we can understand, uncovering new tools to unlock new questions and new answers, has led us to some pretty amazing places. For instance, germ theory, which absolutely gives us a survival advantage because now we know what's making us sick and can fight it. Being able to defeat your own predators is sort of what humans do.
And so, young Joseph Ratzinger argues that the only satisfying explanation for this universal objective intelligibility is a great intelligence who has thought the universe into being. That if you understand things like take for instance, gravity, it works in a set way. There's no reason why it works in a set way that we can discern. And yet if it didn't, we couldn't be having this conversation. We wouldn't be living. And so for the universe to exist, you cannot say here survival of the fittest, because that doesn't explain why the universe holds together. But you take all of those things, and Ratzinger says, those look like intelligence.
It looks like a maple leaf. So he's kind of all over the place here. Gravity works in the way that it works, and we don't know why. Therefore, God? Well, why? Why not random dice roll? He mentions fine-tuning. We've run through fine-tuning a number of times, and the simple fact of the matter is, if you roll a set of dice, the dice come up with a number. It could be random. It could be this is the only set of values that are possible to roll. Even if they're six-sided dice, if they all have ones on every side, you're going to get all ones. And also, we don't know that this is the only set of universal values that can generate life. There might be some that are better for life, which may explain why we have a big, huge universe with one planet living on 10% of its surface, and not even always very comfortably at that. So a fine-tuned universe, you would expect to have a lot more life in it, if it's fine-tuned for life. If the goal is to create intelligent beings capable of knowing, loving, and serving the Creator, whatever that might be, right? So, yeah, fine-tuning doesn't hold up. The arbitrariness of gravity is incoherent. It's a topical mess.
How are we as knowers able to know? Well, that only makes sense if we've been known and kind of loved into existence.
Again, that does not follow. What does being loved have to do with your ability to know? And what does being known have to do with your ability to know? I, for example, know my phone. it has been known. Does that mean that it is now alive, aware, and conscious because it has been known? Or do I have to love it first and then it'll come to life? Oh, my dear phone, how I love you. Nope, still dead.
If a divine intelligence has created our intelligence. Because if we're just random chaos, it doesn't make sense that random chaos understands the big picture or the small picture, any picture at all.
Argument from incredulity. There's a couple of other fallacies in there, like the classical tornado through a junkyard. Well, if it's just random chance, it doesn't make sense there should be complexity. Except it does. If you understand even the most basic level of science, you understand that there is a difference between the maximum possible entropy and the total entropy observed, and that work, the use of energy to move matter around in things, can be utilized in order to push up that gradient against entropy. And as it happens, we just so happen to live on a planet orbiting a nice bright star that just dumps tons of energy onto us, facilitating our gradual movement up that entropic gradient to greater and greater complexity.
But I want to give Benedict XVI his own kind of chance to explain his thought. He says reason should be more open, that it should indeed perceive these facts, but also realize that they're not enough to explain all of reality. They're insufficient. Our reason is broader and can also see that our reason is not basically something irrational, a product of rationality, but that reason, creative reason, precedes everything, and we are truly the reflection of creative reason.
We don't yet understand all of reality, which is true, and that reason is not irrational, which we believe to be true. So far, it's been shown to be true, but it's not an absolute, and that creative reason precedes everything that we discover, which I suppose is true in a poetic sense, because before you can discover that Jupiter has 4 moons orbiting it and not the Earth, you have to have the idea to make a telescope that can see into space. Before we can show that the Earth is not flat, you have to have the idea that you might be able to use sticks and shadows in different locations to observe different angles and make the calculation. So I can kind of get down with that idea.
So another way of framing this would be to say, where does reason come from? Does it come from sheer accident? Or does it come from creative reason? That is, a reason, a divine, uncreated reason, creates our human reason.
False dichotomy. Reason doesn't necessarily have to be from a divine source, but it doesn't have to be a random accident either. Just like evolution, things build upon things. When you're about to have a child, you don't take a random mess of matter, shake it up, and hope it comes out as a human baby. It might be a monkey, it might be a turtle, who knows? It's all random. No, of course not. Because life, biology, evolution, all these things, they build on what's already there, which is not random because it's iterative. The same thing is true of cognition, mental capabilities, and reason itself. Every step we take is not random because it's predicated on the preceding step. Not only do we not need a divine source to toss away the, oh, it must be random argument, but in fact, the very records of our history that show each step as we've made it disprove the possibility that it was simply handed to us by a divine source. We can see the footsteps of our progress, so we know we didn't just appear in this spot right now.
If a divine, uncreated reason creates my human reason, makes sense. I can understand why I have reason. If random chaos creates my human reason, it's not clear why I have reason, and significantly, it's not clear why I can trust my reason.
No. So he's running with the false dichotomy, and of course he would, because it's his false dichotomy. But even if your reason were the result of random chance, it would still be reason, or it wouldn't be reason. No, if you have reason, even if it's given to you by chance, then it's reasonable to use it. You've still arrived at rationality, and you can test it, verify it works, and put it to use.
But it does mean that if Ratzinger's right about the argument from reason, then one of the consequences of that is that my life has purpose.
How? Where do you get that from? We're just... he's already reading way into what Benedict said, but now he's jumping to my life has purpose. Does the lack of having reason mean your life has no purpose? If you have a pet, for example, say a kitty cat, lovely kitty, loves to purr, very fuzzy, very nice. The fact that the cat can't solve the quadratic equation, does that mean its life has no purpose? Does that mean that it just doesn't exist for anything? Come on now. Your ability to reason has no bearing on whether or not your life has purpose. And why do people get so hung up on this idea that life has to have purpose? Where does that come from? That's not from reason. If you have a person in your life who's not capable of higher level philosophy, does that mean their life is worthless? That they have, because they lack philosopher level reasoning capability, that their life has no purpose, no function, no benefit? Obviously not. So the whole argument is junk.
Break the argument down. Number one, that the outside world, the universe more broadly, must be knowable.
I'll concede that one tentatively, because I don't know that the universe must be knowable, but the universe we observe appears to be knowable to the extent we've managed to explore it so far.
And number two, I must have a mind capable of knowing true things.
Does it necessarily have to be true things? Okay, I'm not going to get into the pedantics and quibble. We're running into a long video now, so I'm going to try to minimize how deep we go into philosophy here. But to rephrase the argument in a more accurate way, you must have a mind capable of knowing things. By that, do we mean understanding things or remembering things? Both would be useful.
The argument here is that neither of these things are adequately explained in atheism.
Atheism? Of course not. Atheism is simply the rejection of a God claim. That's all it addresses. It doesn't explain the evolution of humanity or the function of the human mind. What are you talking about?
Two animals. And one of them is unaware where it is. It's in a total stupor. It's in a total state of unreality. And the other one is keenly aware of everything and everyone around it. That second animal will outperform the first one. Now, there's a couple things to note about it. First, that only explains the second point. The first point, that the outside world must be knowable, that is certainly convenient. That is certainly required for the evolutionary argument to work, but evolution doesn't explain why the universe is knowable.
Our friend here seems to have some weird ideas about what things should explain what. Evolution has nothing to do with the universe or why it might be knowable. Evolution only explains the diversity of life we observe today. That's it. Not where life came from, let alone not how the universe is configured. I don't know if that's a red herring or a straw man. There's multiple fallacies bundled up under that tiny little must that he's invoking and then trying to spread over way too much intellectual property here.
And so here I want to introduce John Gray. He's an atheist. He's a philosopher at the London School of Economics. But I particularly want to draw out what he says about this idea that evolution is going to make us capable of knowing true things about the world. He points out that there's no reason to believe that. It's a very naive vision of the world.
That's true in as far as it goes. Evolution doesn't make any organism do anything. Evolution doesn't have a plan. It doesn't have a goal in mind. It simply takes what works, tweaks it, and sees what works better or worse for the next iteration of life. Evolution has no idea about an eyeball. It just gradually, step by step, reached the state where we have working eyeballs, which of course took a very, very long time to do, but it did that because it was advantageous to do that. The results were greater survivability, greater adaptability, because of greater knowledge coming in.
He says, modern humanism is the faith that through science, humankind can know the truth and so be free.
That's not how I would define humanism, but do go on.
But if Darwin's theory of natural selection is true, this is impossible. The human mind serves evolutionary success, not truth. To think otherwise is to resurrect the pre-Darwinian error that humans are different from all other animals. You cut God out of the picture and just have natural selection, and it's not going to lead you to, aha, this is how we all know the truth. Like, skepticism and reason can't both be true.
It seems to me that skepticism and reason require each other to function. Can't both be true. It must be opposite day up here in Shameless Popery.
Gray goes on, and he talks about the theory of memes. Now, memes is, nowadays we think of it as just like funny images that you send, but it comes from Richard Dawkins. The idea of thinking about ideas almost like organisms that spread. And
so he's going to over-explain the hell out of this. I'll simplify. You're familiar with genes. Genetic characteristics spread through the genetic code. Memes are cultural genes. It's an ideological version of a trait. That's it.
And so we can't really say that an idea spreading means that it's true.
No, we can't say from an evolutionary perspective that an idea spreading means that it's true, because ideology has nothing whatsoever to do with evolution.
A hallmark of a lot of liberal thought, that we just need more conversation, we need more dialogue, because if everybody's got an equal share, then the truth is going to win out just through this kind of natural evolutionary process.
If dialogues are predicated on reason and rationality, then eventually truth will win out. But when people don't care about truth, when they care about power, convincing others, tricking people, running their scam, getting people to send in money, getting people to believe in their preferred ideology, when people don't care about the truth, then the discourse will not favor truth. Only when you prioritize reason and skepticism can you have any chance of making headway towards truth.
And Gray's point is, what are you basing that belief on? It seems to be purely irrational, because so often in history, there are these examples where the bad guys seem to win, and bad ideas survive and good ideas don't.
Yeah, when you don't prioritize truth, then truth doesn't win.
He then says, Darwinian theory tells us that an interest in truth is not needed for survival or reproduction.
After a fashion, monkeys don't give a fuck about truth. Apes could care less. What is true matters to every living thing. A plant can't grow in a place with no sun. So whether they understand truth is completely irrelevant, but the truth of those things matters very much when it comes to survival. It does very much matter what truth is. If you are an anti-vaxxer, you've already given yourself a significant survival disadvantage. For example,
more often it is a disadvantage. We'll say deception is common among primates and birds. He gives the example of ravens who pretend to hide food while actually storing it elsewhere. And that evolutionary psychologists have shown that deceit is pervasive in animal communication. Well, Gray says, self-deception may help you to deceive others. And he suggests being able to deceive others is going to be enhanced by the ability to deceive yourself if I'm lied to by others. And believe a certain medicine is helping me. It actually, my body gets tricked into getting better. So there's all of these areas where we already know that we can't say there's an evolutionary advantage to truth. Truth might be morally superior, but it's not evolutionarily superior. Self-delusion has manifold benefits.
Says the religious guy. As usual, the irony completely escapes him.
If we know that and believe we're just the result of unguided evolution, we cannot reasonably say, but the rest of our beliefs are all true.
I'm getting really sick of his scoffing laugh. especially when he's not actually making a logical point it's not nearly as well founded as he thinks it is.
Okay, going back to Gray. Then the view that clusters of false beliefs. Quite to the contrary, evolution will select for a degree of self-deception. In other words, from a merely evolutionary perspective, we would expect to find creatures who are at least somewhat self-deceived so that they can be better at deceiving others.
The irony completely escapes him.
And he quotes another author, Trivers, that evolution favors useful error. Like, there's just no reason to believe that our vision of the world is accurate, including our vision of evolution, including our vision of atheism, including our vision of fill in the blank. Oh, well, my reason tells me God doesn't exist, but my reason also tells me my reason can't be trusted. Okay, that's a major problem.
So what if your reason can't tell you that God doesn't exist? You still have no reason to think that God does exist, or any particular God. And if the whole point of this entire exercise is to tell people you can't trust your reason, so believe what I'm telling you, why should we believe that? You just told us we can't trust our reason. Does that mean the default claim is automatically true? Not only have you not demonstrated it, you've made the case that it cannot be demonstrated. So now we will never believe you. Good job, I guess. Okay, so he just iterates wildly on top of this already very shaky foundation of fallacies and obviously false things, and doesn't really get anywhere with it except to assert his original points, which are still not demonstrated, that only insert magical being of your choice here means your brain can work good. For all the twisting and turning and corruption of ideas that our friend here tried, he still didn't actually build a bridge between human minds and the divine. Alas. This one was a little bit of a long one, but there was a lot of stuff that definitely may not have been necessary to address, but sure was fun to address. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for subscribing. A big thank you to our supporters on Patreon who help keep a small channel like this going. I greatly appreciate it. And as always, remember, you don't have to substitute reason for science, logic for reason, and philosophy for logic in order to make an argument that doesn't actually work anyway without a pile of fallacies, because you are better than religion.